The carriage stopped at the edge of the Fae Court, and she felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes before the door had even opened. The veil over her face was silk, the color of morning, black, shot through with silver thread that caught the perpetual twilight of the Fae realm and held it like captured starlight. She had worn it since the border crossing. She would wear it until her husband chose to lift it, if he ever chose to. The court was waiting. They had arranged themselves along the obsidian path like carrion birds in velvet and gossamer, lords and ladies of the Fae, their beauty so sharp it cut the air. She walked between them with her hands folded and her head high. She did not speak, because she could not speak, because she had never spoken a word in all her 19 years. The silence that lived in her throat was older than memory. Courtier with eyes like smoked glass leaned toward his companion and did not bother to whisper. They sent a mute, to wed a prince. What insult is this? She kept walking. The throne room opened before her like a wound. At its end, on a seat of twisted thornwood that seemed to breathe, sat the Fae Prince. He did not look up. His face was turned to the side, half in shadow. What she could see of it was flawless. High cheekbones, a mouth sculpted for cruelty, hair the color of winter moonlight. But she had been watching the Fae since childhood. She knew what glamour felt like against the skin of the world. It was a pressure, a wrongness, like a note held too long on a harp string. And every inch of him was wrong. She reached the dais. The court fell silent. The prince finally turned, and his eyes met hers through the veil. For one heartbeat, one single, splintered heartbeat, his glamour flickered. She saw what lived beneath, not a monster, just a face that had been unmade and badly remade. Scar tissue like rivers of silver. One eye clouded. The jaw slightly canted where it had been broken and never properly healed. The face of someone who had been punished for being beautiful, and then punished again for surviving. She did not flinch. He saw that she did not flinch. Something moved behind his eyes. Not hope, not yet. Hope was too dangerous a word, but something adjacent to it. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. The ceremony took 7 minutes. She spoke no vows. She could not. When the High Fae asked if anyone objected, the court laughed, a low, musical, poisonous sound. Prince did not laugh. He watched his bride with the stillness of a man who had learned long ago that attention was the first thing stolen from the powerless. That night she was shown to a chamber 3 corridors from his, not the consort's quarters, not the honored guest wing. A servant's room, drafty and dim, with a single candle and a basin of cold water. The message was clear: you are a formality, a treaty signed in flesh. Nothing more. She sat on the edge of the hard bed and did not cry. She had not come here expecting love. She had come because her village was dying, blight in the fields, sickness in the wells, and the Fae Court had offered a bargain: 1 bride for 1 harvest. A life for 100 lives. It was the easiest choice she had ever made. What she had not expected was to see a king unmade beneath a mask. What she had not expected was to recognize him. She pulled a scrap of paper from her sleeve and a stub of charcoal from her boot. By the dying candlelight, she wrote a single line: I know your face. She folded it small and tucked it into her palm. Tomorrow she would find a way to give it to him. The court ignored her with the precision of an art form. 3 days passed, then 7. She ate alone, walked the gardens alone, slept in her cold room alone. No one spoke to her. No one looked at her. She moved through the Fae Court like a ghost who had forgotten how to haunt, present but unregistered, seen but unacknowledged. The servants left her meals outside her door. The guard's eyes slid past her like water over stone. She did not waste the silence. She learned the rhythm of the court, the morning bells that rang at 7th hour, the changing of the guards at noon, the hour before dusk, when the prince walked the eastern parapet alone, always with his face turned away from the setting sun, as if even the light was not permitted to look at him directly. On the 8th day, she left him a gift, a winter rose, pale as bone, placed on the parapet wall where he would find it. No note. No name, just the flower, and the silence around it. The next day, the rose was gone. She left another gift the day after that, a smooth river stone she had found in the garden, veined with silver that matched the scars beneath his glamour, then a black feather from a raven that had died near the eastern gate, then a piece of honeycomb wrapped in a leaf. Small things, quiet things, things that said, "I see you," without speaking a word. On the 14th day, she came to the parapet and found a piece of paper waiting where she usually left her gift. On it, in handwriting that looked like it had been carved rather than written. Why? She wrote back beneath his word. Because no one else does. They began a correspondence. Paper scraps left on parapet walls, tucked into the hollow of an old oak, pressed between the pages of books in the neglected library where she had taken to spending her afternoons. He asked her about her village. She told him about the blight, the sickness, the bargain. He asked why she had volunteered. She wrote, "Dying for something is easier than dying for nothing." He did not write back for 3 days after that. When he finally did, the paper was crumpled, as if it had been held too tightly. "I have worn this mask for 200 years. You are the first person who has ever tried to see through it." She read those words 7 times. On the 21st day she came to the parapet and he was already there. Not walking, not turned away, but waiting, facing the door she always entered through. His glamour was intact, the perfect face presented to the twilight, but his posture was different, less guarded, less braced for impact. He did not speak, neither did she. They stood side by side and watched the sun bleed out across the horizon. And for the first time since she had arrived, the silence did not feel like an absence. It felt like a language they were both learning to speak. She reached into her sleeve and handed him that night's gift, a small folded paper. He opened it in front of her for the first time, instead of waiting until he was alone. "You are not what they made you." He looked at her, drew the veil, through the silence, through everything that stood between them and the truth, and for the second time since she had arrived, his glamour flickered. But this time, he did not look away. The assassination came at midnight, on the 25th day of her residence. She heard the crash from 3 corridors away, the sound of glass shattering and a cry that was cut short too quickly. She ran. She did not think. She did not hesitate. She ran toward the sound in her bare feet, her nightdress catching on the rough stone, the cold air slicing her lungs. The guards were already down, slumped against the walls with their eyes open and unseeing, breathing but not present, caught in some Fae sleep-weaving she did not have time to understand. The prince's chamber doors were broken inward. She stepped through the splintered wood and saw him on the floor, one hand pressed to his side where blood was spreading like a dark flower. The other hand was raised with light gathering in his palm. Defensive magic. The last reserves of a dying Fae. The assassins were circling, 2 still standing. The 3rd was already dead, a scorch mark on the stones where he had fallen. But it was not the blood that stopped her heart. It was his face. The glamour was gone, completely gone, shattered by the attack, by the blood loss, by the concentration required to stay alive. His true face was bare to the world, the scars, the clouded eye, the broken jaw, the centuries of damage that no magic had been able to fully erase. The assassins were laughing. "That's what you've been hiding?" one of them hissed. "All that power, and you're just a broken thing." The prince did not answer. He was saving his magic. His eyes, the one that worked and the one that didn't, were fixed on his attackers with the calm of someone who had already accepted death. She stepped forward, not toward the assassins, toward him. She walked past the men with obsidian blades, past the broken glass that cut her feet, past the body of the dead attacker, and she knelt beside the Fae Prince and touched his face. Her fingers found the deepest scar, the one that ran from temple to jaw, the one that had never healed right, and traced its length with a tenderness that had no equivalent in any language she could not speak. He stared at her. His hand, still pressed to his bleeding side, trembled. "You should run," he whispered. She shook her head. She had been running her whole life, running from pity, from the assumption that silence meant stupidity, from the looks people gave her when they realized she would never speak their language, running from the slow death of her village, the slow death of her body, the slow death of hope. She was tired of running. She stayed. One of the assassins grabbed her shoulder. She ignored him. She kept her eyes on the prince's ruined face and her hand on his scarred cheek. She did not look away, did not flinch, did not give them the satisfaction of her fear. The prince looked at her for a long moment, really looked, the way she had been looking at him since the day she arrived. And then something in his expression shifted, hardened, became resolve. He raised his hand. The light that erupted from his palm was not defensive. It was offensive, a blast of raw Fae power that threw both assassins against the far wall with enough force to crack stone. They crumpled. They did not rise. Silence returned to the room. The prince, bleeding, broken, barefaced, looked at the woman who had knelt beside him when anyone with sense would have run. Why? He asked. The same question he had written on that first scrap of paper. The question that had started everything. She could not answer with her voice. So, she answered the only way she could. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his scarred forehead. Let the jester say what words never could. Because you are worth saving. Because I see you. Because I was never afraid. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. She had seen kings weep before, in stories, in songs, in the old tales her mother used to sign by firelight, but she had never seen anything like this. This was not grief. This was not weakness. This was release. 200 years of hiding. And someone had finally looked at his true face and stayed. The sun rose over the Fae Court and found them still there, side by side on the cold stone floor, surrounded by broken glass and dead men, and something that had been born in the wreckage. Trust. They moved him to her chamber. It was smaller than his, but the windows were intact and the door still locked from the inside. Those were the only things that mattered now. She bound his wound with strips torn from her own nightdress, her hands steady despite the blood. He watched her with an expression she could not name. Wonder and exhaustion and something rawer than both. The glamour had not returned. He did not seem to care anymore. My name, he said on the third night of his recovery. His voice was hoarse. You should know my name. She looked up from the basin where she was washing the blood from her hands. It was taken from me, he continued, when I was a child. The Fae Court has a tradition. They take the true names of their princes and lock them away to keep them loyal. Without your name, you are nothing. You belong to whoever holds it. She waited. Her hands had stilled in the water. I have not heard my own name in 200 years. The words hung in the air between them, heavy as stone. She thought about what it meant to live without your name. To be called Prince, my lord, your highness. Titles that belong to the throne, not to the man. To forget the sound of your own mother naming you. She pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the dwindling stack she kept beside her bed. Her charcoal was nearly gone now, a stub no longer than her thumb. But there was enough left for this. She wrote slowly, carefully, each letter a confession. I know your name. I have known it since I was 7 years old. He read the words. His face went still. I don't understand. She wrote more. The charcoal was trembling in her fingers now. When I was a child, I had a fever. For 3 days I burned. My mother thought I would die. On the third night, I dreamed of a boy with silver hair and a broken face, standing alone in a room made of shadows. He told me his name. He told me to remember it. She had never forgotten. She had never known why. But when she walked into the throne room and saw the Fae Prince on his thornwood seat, she had recognized him instantly. Not the glamour. Never the glamour, but the shape of the man beneath it, the boy from the fever dream. The name had been waiting on her tongue for 12 years, trapped behind a voice that could not speak it. What is it? He whispered. What is my name? She wrote it. 1 word, 5 letters. He read it. And the sound that left his throat was not a sob. It was something older than sobbing. Something that had been dammed up since childhood and was only now being released. He pressed his forehead to the paper and his shoulders shook, and his hands clutched the edges of the page as if it was the only solid thing left in the world. She sat beside him. She did not speak because she could not, but she let her presence say everything her voice could not. You are known. You are found. You are not alone. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes, the working one, the clouded one. Both of them were clearer than she had ever seen them. "Can you speak it?" he asked. "Can you say my name?" She shook her head. Why was a longer story? It would take more paper than she had, more charcoal than remained, more time than this moment could hold. But she knew what speaking it would cost. The magic that had stolen his name was old magic, binding magic, and breaking it would demand a price equal to the theft. A voice for a name, a silence for a soul. He saw the answer in her face. "Then don't," he said. "Don't speak it. I would rather be nameless than be the reason you lose the last thing." She pressed her fingers to his lip. "You are not nameless," her eyes said. "You have never been nameless. I have been carrying your name in my heart for 12 years. I can carry it a little longer." She reached for the charcoal one last time. "Speak it yourself. Say it aloud, claim it back." He looked at the word she had written. His own name, given back to him after 2 centuries of silence. His lips formed the shape of it, once, twice, and on the 3rd attempt he whispered it into the dark. The air changed. The shadows in the corners of the room drew back. Something ancient and cruel and binding snapped like a thread pulled too tight. He gasped, not in pain but in release, in recognition. In the flood of a selfhood he had thought was lost forever. He had his name. She had given it back. And in the silence that followed, as he reached for her hand and held it against his heart, she understood something she had never understood before. You do not need a voice to change the world. You only need the courage to stay when everyone else would run. The morning of her decision came wrapped in gold. Autumn had arrived in the Fae realm. Not the dying autumn of the mortal world, but something wilder and more alive. A season of copper light and crisp air and leaves that turned the color of flame before they fell. She stood at the window of what was now their chamber. The prince had refused to return to his old rooms. He had ordered the broken doors left broken as a reminder. Below, the court prepared for the harvest festival. Behind her, the prince, no, the king, though the coronation was still weeks away, was dressing for the ceremony. His glamour was up, the flawless face presented to the world. But when he caught her watching him in the mirror, he let it drop, just for her, just for a moment. The scars, the clouded eye, the broken jaw, all of it visible, all of it offered like a gift. She smiled. He smiled back. They had spent the weeks since the assassination in a strange liminal space. Not quite strangers, not quite lovers, something in between that had no name in any language she could sign. He had told her about his childhood, about the Fae Court's cruelties, about the centuries of isolation that had turned him into something harder than he wanted to be. She had written him stories of her village, of her mother's hands shaping bread, of the way the river sounded in spring. He had learned to read her silences. She had learned that language was not the only way to be known. But the harvest festival brought a complication neither of them had anticipated. The treaty that bound her to the Fae Court had a clause. One she had not been told, one her village had not been told, one that had been buried in the fine print of a bargain made in desperation. The bride was not a bride. The bride was a sacrifice. The blight that had been killing her village was Fae magic, a curse laid by the same court that now demanded her life in exchange for its lifting. And the curse could not be lifted by a wedding. It could only be lifted by a death, her death. She found the document in the library, in a book she had pulled from the shelf at random, as if fate itself had guided her hand. She read it 3 times to be sure. And then she sat very still for a very long time. And then she made her choice. She did not tell him. She knew he would try to stop her. She knew he would burn the court to the ground before he let them touch her. She knew, because she knew him now in the way that silence teaches you to know people, that he would trade his reclaimed name, his reclaimed power, his reclaimed life for hers without a second thought. She could not let him. So on the morning of the harvest festival, she dressed in her finest gown, the one the court had given her, silver and black and shimmering with Fae magic, and she walked to the ceremonial circle alone. The court was already gathered. The high Fae who had performed their wedding stood at the center, holding a blade that was not ceremonial at all. The prince was not there. She had made sure of it. A note left on his pillow, a lie about meeting him at the festival, a smile that had cost her more than any words ever could. She stepped into the circle. The High Fae began to speak. The blade was raised. The words of unbinding filled the air like smoke, and then the air split apart. The prince, her king, the man whose name she had carried since childhood, walked through the crowd and into the circle. His face was bare, no glamour, no mask, just the truth of him, presented to a court that had spent 200 years teaching him to hide it. "Stop," he said. The High Fae froze. The blade wavered. The court gasped, not at the command but at the face. They had never seen him. Not once. Not in 200 years. "There will be no sacrifice today," he said. "There will be no sacrifice ever again. You took my name when I was a child. You took my face when I was a boy. You will not take her. The curse," the High Fae began, "can be broken another way. I found it. In the old texts. In the books you hid from me." He turned to her. His ruined face was beautiful in the autumn light. "A life freely given," he said quietly. "That's what the old magic requires. Not a death. A life. Freely given to the land that was cursed." She understood before he finished speaking. She nodded. She stepped forward, out of the ceremonial circle, and knelt in the grass at the base of the oldest tree in the Fae realm. An oak that had stood since before the court was built. Since before the Fae had names. Since before the world knew the difference between magic and miracle. She pressed her palm to its root. She closed her eyes, and she gave her voice, not stolen, not taken, given, freely, fully, with all the love and loss and hope that a voiceless woman could pour into a single act of sacrifice. She gave the only thing she had ever had to give, not her life, but the silence that had shaped her life, the quiet that had made her who she was. She opened her mouth. She shaped the prince's true name on her tongue, and she spoke it. The word left her lips like a bell struck once. It rang across the clearing, across the court, across the whole of the Fae realm. The oak tree shuddered. The blight in her village, 300 miles away, withered and died in a single breath. The curse broke, and her voice broke with it. She felt it leave her, the ability to speak, the possibility of words, the dream she had carried since childhood of one day saying her own name aloud. It drained from her throat like water from a cracked vessel, and when it was gone forever. She opened her eyes. The prince was kneeling in front of her. His face, his beautiful broken unmasked face, was wet with tears. "You spoke my name," he said. She could not answer. She could never answer again. "You gave your voice for my name, for my kingdom, for people who were never kind to you." She raised her hand. She touched his scarred cheek. She let the gesture say everything. "Yes, I did. I would do it again." He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips, and then he did something no Fae king had ever done. Something no one in the court had ever seen. Something that would become legend before the sun set. He knelt lower. He pressed his forehead to her knees, and he spoke her name. Not the name the court had given her. The mute bride, the silent sacrifice, the girl from the dying village. Her real name. The words he had written for him on a scrap of paper weeks ago, in the quiet of their room. The one he had learned by listening, not by magic. The one he had practiced in the dark when he thought she was asleep. He said it aloud. He gave it to the world. He let everyone hear. And in the Fae realm, where names were power, where names were stolen and traded and locked away like treasure, in that realm, the king kneeling before a mortal woman and speaking her name like a prayer was the most radical act of love anyone had ever witnessed. She could not say his name again. Her voice was gone, but as he lifted his head and met her eyes, she realized she did not need to. He had heard it once. That was enough. That was everything. He had been seen. She had been heard. And in the end that was all either of them had ever wanted. The harvest came. The blight ended. The court changed, slowly, imperfectly but genuinely, under a king who no longer hid his face, and the queen who could not speak became the most listened to voice in the realm. Because when you have spent your whole life in silence, you learn to hear what others miss. They ruled together for 67 years. On the last day of her life, old now, gray now, her hands still signing stories to the great-grandchildren of the courtiers who had once mocked her. She looked at her king, her prince, her husband, the boy from the fever dream who had grown into the man she had chosen again and again. His glamour was down. It was always down now. She smiled. He smiled back. And in the silence of that final evening, as the autumn light turned the world to copper, she realized she had never needed a voice to tell him she loved him. He had known from the first moment she did not flinch. He had always known.